So, hi, folks. Hi, Earthlings, as I say sometimes. This is on Human-Nonhuman Relations podcast. This is, I think, the third one we've done as video. If you're hearing audio only, it's because the video didn't turn out. But so we're trying it with video anyway. So this is number 46 of the series. I call it an occasional series because I hardly ever do it anymore, really. But we've managed to get through to 46 shows. This is the 46th. And my special guest today is Wendy Mcgovern, an unforgettable surname. So, we might explain that later.
Thanks for getting that right, Roger. Thank you. Appreciate it.
So Wendy's associated with something called Thrive Vegan World, which is a podcast and an up-and-coming website. The podcast is really good, so I recommend that you check that out. So the best place is Facebook right now. Then is it, Wendy?
Well, I usually share the links on there, but you can get the podcast from any of the standard places where you'd get a podcast. So on all the major platforms, so you should be able to get it anywhere, I think.
In that case, I'll probably contact you after this because I've never been able to do all that, like put it all onto everything. I just have it on Blogger, I think, and that's all. Right. So it's not on iTunes. It's not. There's this thing called the RSS link. I don't even do that. So my podcast never gets listened to by many people. So welcome to Wendy and the listeners. There you go. So, Wendy, you've been vegan for 21 years, and you first bumped into an Uncaged, was it an event or a stall? And it's interesting, isn't it? Because Uncaged is almost like unknown. I mean, it's still running, isn't it?
No, they changed actually. So actually, and that was way before I went vegan. That was way back when I was still living at home with my folks, and before I went off to uni. So I was kind of on a day out in Sheffield with a friend, and we just used to head off up to Sheffield because I'm from Rotherham. We'd head off on a day out. It was like a day out to go up to Sheffield and look around the shops.
The excitement of Sheffield, eh?
It was really exciting. It was all the big shops in Sheffield, and particularly looking through the music shops, going through all the vinyls and going through all the clothes shops and stuff. Like we were into all the punky stuff, and so we'd go all around the shops. And then as we were walking back to get the bus, we came across a stall, and of course those stalls back in the day, especially when you have all the posters and the flyers out, they're very eye-catching because you can see pictures that you're thinking, oh my god, what's that? And it's the pictures of other animals. Often, it's the kind of traumatic pictures that you see, and it drew my attention. And I just remember getting this real feeling in my body of just being flooded with this emotion of like, oh my god, this is just horror, this is horrific, how is this happening? And that was like my first experience of kind of animal rights, really, and that just drew me, and I was immediately just so drawn to getting into campaigns and things. So I joined Uncaged Campaigns, it was at the time, and I just got involved doing lots of campaigns and things like that.
Dr.
Lyons, yeah, at the time he wasn't doctor, but then he got his doctorate later on. So I did quite a lot of stuff with them for a while, but that was my first introduction to animal rights. But I wasn't vegan then, I was still vegetarian. It was the days when I didn't even know what vegan was. I hardly knew what vegetarian was. It was just one of those, not up in Rotherham in those days. So yeah, that was my introduction.
So did you start campaigning before you went vegan, or the other way around?
Yeah, before I went vegan, I was vegetarian for quite a while, and involved in animal rights and activism way before I even became aware of vegan. And actually, it was through the campaign that I started to become aware of it, because I started to kind of get magazines and flyers and things like this that started talking about the dairy industry and the egg industry and things like that, and that really opened my eyes then to like the other horrors of the other industries, because before that it was just the thought of flesh, meat, like, oh, we're not eating meat anymore, that's the thing to do, don't wear leather, etc. But it was dairy and eggs was still not in my awareness. It was like, oh, you don't kill the animals to get the cheese and the milk, so that's fine. But then once my eyes were open to that took me then down the road to becoming vegan. So yeah.
Similar story to me, I guess, because I did that thing. I got involved with the Hunt Saboteurs, and then you did that thing of getting leaflets and talks and all that in the van on the way and that on the way back. And then suddenly this whole other world of animal use and exploitation, rights violations, all kind of opened out, and thought, well, there's no point in just doing this. It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
And, I was lucky because vegetarianism never made any sense to me right from the start, and so I kind of skipped the vegetarian phase, which I'm always kind of grateful for.
Yeah.
So apart from Thrive, you're obviously part of the team, along with myself and Jeremy and Brad and Tom, of the Animal Rights Show. And in fact, I think you've been credited now of kind of conceiving and running our kind of most popular show so far, which was the second one of the burnout ones. And it's something from that prompted me to invite you to the podcast today, because you talked about in one of your slides, you talked about this issue of inner dialogue. And can you remember what you were getting at there, and why it's important in terms of activism?
Yeah, that was a really interesting show, actually, especially because I was leading it, and I kind of drew on my experience as a coach to kind of bring what I've learned and used as a coach into.
I'm a double-decker bus myself.
I can tell. That just reminded me of double deckers. Do you remember double decker chocolate bars? When you said that, I just bought that.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Were they one of the ones that got renamed something else, like Snickers or something?
I don't think they did. I think they just disappeared.
Oh.
Yeah, I know. I remember the days of marathon. I don't think many people remember the old marathons, do they?
Yeah, I remember that, unfortunately.
Showing our age. So I was drawing on my experience as a coach to kind of bring what I've learned, what I've used with clients through coaching into kind of helping activists with activism, because we were talking about how to avoid burnout and how to really kind of thrive and flourish as an individual in terms of being a strong individual with resilience in a sustainable movement, because I think that's a problem that we see. And the inner dialogue, I think that's something that's really important, because our beliefs really are very powerful, and whenever we're talking to ourselves, we have that inner voice. That inner voice is kind of reinforcing beliefs back to ourselves. So if we're talking to ourselves really harshly and we've got a harsh inner critic, we are then sort of reinforcing those beliefs that we're no good, or we're rubbish, or we're not as good as that person, or we're useless, or whatever it might be. I'm not a confident person. All these things that we tell ourselves, we are then playing out in the world because we're reinforcing beliefs back to ourselves. And it's one thing that really helped me when I first got into self-development and coaching, was to start picking up on what my inner dialogue was with myself. And it was often very negative. And I think most people, if they really stop to pay attention and observe what their inner dialogue is, it will often be quite negative. But that negativity
is debilitating, can't it?
It's very debilitating, yeah, because you will play out those thoughts and beliefs in your daily life, and that creates your reality. And then you see that reality, and then it reinforces the beliefs back to yourself. So our beliefs are actually really, really powerful. So the inner dialogue, I think for me, the first thing that I started to do was to just pay attention and just notice, right, am I speaking harshly to myself? Am I telling myself I'm rubbish, I'm useless, I didn't do that very well? Because, and then I started to kind of think, okay, well, how can I then make this different? What can I do differently? And I started to switch the dialogue and become less of a critic and more of a coach. So I now think of my inner voice as an inner coach. And I think it's not that we should ignore that voice. I think it's just we should use that voice to serve us and to help empower us rather than to disempower us. So it's about maybe listening to some of the messages and asking yourself, right, is that message you're giving me right now, is that serving me? Is it empowering me? Is it helping me in this situation? Because sometimes the voice might have a strong message. It might have an important thing for you to listen to and pay attention to, like you're not doing something as well as you could, or so you're not aligned with something that you're doing. So it's important to say, okay, what is the message? Is there a message? And then if there is, what can I do better? What can I do differently? So you actually sort of thank that voice and go, thank you for pointing something out to me. Now I'm going to take that on board and try and do this better, but not constantly beat yourself up, not constantly be hard on yourself. I think that's what I was really talking about with that.
Yeah, I want to just focus on one thing you said there was the empowerment part, because I wonder if that's I mean, if I'm really getting this concept right, because I'm really interested in it. Is that what would say, for example, why people say to people like Earthling Ed, oh, you're so calm, you're so rational, you're so good, because they've got this dialogue saying you couldn't do that, so it's disempowering in that sense of, it could be that, as I said, debilitating, because what we
Yeah.
really want to do is work out a way of empowering people and think, I could do that, rather than, oh, aren't you wonderful because you can do that. That would.
Yeah, I think there is an element of that in there, because I think it comes into comparison as well, because I think people will look at someone like Earthling Ed or another of the more high profile people in the movement, and
Entrepreneurs.
entrepreneurs, and they will, and maybe, and especially I think when someone is put up on a pedestal a little bit, then there's that element of you're beneath them. So you look up, when we even say the language, don't we? We look up to people. So then we feel beneath them. So then we put these people on a pedestal, and it's not necessarily their fault or their doing. As humans, I think we do this. We look up to leaders. We want these figures. But then we always feel beneath them, and we always feel that we're not as good as that. So then comes in the element of comparison, which then can feed in with that inner dialogue of, oh, I'm not as good as them, I could never do this, and look at how good they are, they're out there doing all this work, and I'm just, oh, I'm not achieving anything. It can really play out. But then you can, really stop yourself getting involved in activism, because you might feel you're never going to be as good as that. But I think the more we elevate people, the worse that's going to be, because we're creating this real distinction between down here or up there, and not seeing all capable.
Yeah, that's interesting. It all feeds into the kind of de-radicalization of social movements, in the sense that once you start having leaders and followers, or professionals and citizens, or civilians, as it was put one time, you're in a kind of a weird place then, because really what you want to do is empower everybody as equals. Even in sociology, in terms of social movement theory, we try to get around that, because the leaders of a social movement were called prime movers in order not to call them leaders. At the same time, it was kind of acknowledging the fact that some people do more than others, if you like. So there's always that, but certainly empowerment within the movement is very important. We need to figure out ways of, rather than kind of aren't I brilliant, it's kind of you can do this. That's the kind of thing.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I think that would be an important part of it, because obviously, I'm really interested in kind of empowering the grassroots, and I think it's people in the grassroots. The reason that they pay money to the entrepreneurs, or to the national groups, is because they believe they can't do that themselves, or they won't do it as good, and that must all be part of the inner dialogue that's going on.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, like I said, our belief systems are so powerful. I don't think we really understand. I mean, I understand it a little bit more now, because I've read about it and looked into it. But I think generally we don't realize how strong our belief systems are, and how from even before the womb we are starting to be programmed with information through our mother and the environment that she's in, and all this kind of thing, when we're in the womb, and then obviously when we're out and we're being programmed and conditioned by our experiences around us. Those beliefs, especially from those formative years, are so powerful. And if you have got those beliefs from being young, especially of like, oh, you're lacking, you're not good enough, you're not confident, you're shy, or this, whatever those beliefs might be, you are going to play those out in your latter years. You will have modeled your behavior on your parents, your grandparents, your environment around you. Your teachers will have given you information, your peers, your friends, your either government, even you pick up so much programming. Those beliefs are so powerful, but the messages you internalize about yourself, especially, will play out in so many different ways in your life. Just an example of how this is a good example of how powerful your belief systems are and how they play out. Actually, just I'm thinking of a program I saw quite a long time ago, but they wanted to look into the concept of luck, because you get people who will think of themselves as lucky, and then you get other people who say they're unlucky, and you tend to see this, and you get this in people. So they were kind of running this kind of experiment or whatever, you might call it. And they had sort of two groups of people, and they framed it in gambling. So they thought, right, how can we kind of play out luck? Gambling's like a great way to test this. So they had these two groups of people. One group was a group of people who thought themselves as very lucky, and the other group thought themselves as very unlucky. And so they took these two groups of people and they took them to a casino. Now they gave the two groups equal amount of chips and kind of sent them on their way to play roulette, and they monitored the game. And so the game played out, and ups and downs and whatever happened, the game finished. So then the important thing was like what happened, what the results. So they took these two groups again separately and they interviewed each of them, and they found the following. So they found that the people in the lucky group, they said, oh, how did the game go? What were your experiences? And the lucky people were saying, oh, yeah, I had a great game. I lost a few, I won a few, but actually overall, I had a very good experience. It was very positive. So it's like, okay, that's interesting. So then they spoke to the unlucky group and said, what was your experiences? And as you might expect, the people in that group were saying, no, actually I had quite a bad experience. I definitely came out very worse than I would have wanted to. And all in all, it was quite negative. So it's kind of like, okay, is this actually a true thing then? Are some people lucky and others unlucky? But then they kind of analysed the results of the game and the chips and the losses and the wins. And what they found that over the two groups, actually, overall, the results were very on par and pretty balanced. So the only difference with those two groups of people were how they perceived themselves and the perception of the experience of the game, nothing to do with the type of person they are. But that just goes to show how we literally will have a perception of ourselves, and then we play that out. And then what our brain does, because we have a system in the brain called the Reticular Articulation system, which what it does, it filters back information to you that it thinks is important, and our brain will find information to prove back our own beliefs. An example of that, do you ever have something where, for example, if you suddenly decided you were going to buy a car, and that car was a particular type of car, and it was going to be red, for example, and then you took yourself out on the road before you've got this car, you've got in mind this car you want to buy, and you'd be surprised at how many of those cars and the red car you're going to see on your travels, because suddenly your brain thinks, this is an important piece of information, let me filter that back. So you will see so many more red cars, and you think, oh, where have all these red cars come from all of a sudden? But they were always there, but maybe your brain wouldn't have thought about them before or thought them important enough. So you might have driven along that road oblivious to the red cars before, but now you're really seeing them because your brain is going, this is important, filter it back. So we're always looking to prove back our own belief system. So we'll see it, we'll seek that evidence out and always filter that back to ourselves. So yeah, it's very, very powerful stuff.
Yeah, it seems connected to the ideas of things like self-fulfilling prophecies and all that kind of idea. Going back to the womb, there is this theory that even if you play certain types of music, as it were, to the forming fetus, that will affect their personality and stuff. So
yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
And if the mother is in a stressful situation, because obviously when we have stress, our bodies fill with different hormones. So we have like cortisol and adrenaline and all these hormones that are pumping around the body. So if the mother is in a stressful environment, and especially if that's a chronic environment where she literally is stressed a lot of the time, those hormones are going to really affect the development of the fetus, and the fetus is developing in order to be prepared to be born into a stressful environment. So even from that young, you're adapting to your environment and hormones and stress and things like this. So yeah, it's really, really interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, it's interesting that. Actually, as you know, I used to teach the sociology of humour, and there's this old joke about this woman who knew she was having twins, male twins. So she used to say at night time to them, be good, be conscientious, be a gentleman, and this kind of stuff. So she ended up being pregnant for 30 years. And so they decided that in the end they would have to do a cesarean section. And so they opened up the womb, and there was two perfectly formed kind of gentlemen in there, and one's going, after you, and the other one said, no, I insist after you. So it does work, the womb thing. So it's not a particularly good joke, but it's one that I remember. I always remember the bad jokes for now. So going back to vivisection, this is an interesting movement issue, isn't it? Because vivisection has got very little kind of traction in the movement at the moment, whereas it used to be the foremost issue. And I know that you're interested in that. Mel Broughton and people like John Curtin have talked about that. And do you have a kind of idea about what's going on there? Is it just because everything's based on veganism now, or what?
Yeah, I've tried to work this out myself and had lots of conversations with different people about it. And when I started, and perhaps like same as you, Roger, when you started, a lot of the movement was anti-vivisection.
Most of it.
Yeah, most of it was very dominant in the movement, and it was like that for a long time, along with kind of hunt stabbing and anti-fur campaigns and things like that.
Yeah, so
it almost feels like there's been a shift, especially in the last few years, with the rise in veganism, maybe. And I think now, because as we've said before, like there didn't used to be such a thing as vegan campaigning. It was campaigning against vivisection, or as we just mentioned, there wasn't such a thing as campaigning and trying to outreach people to becoming vegan. That didn't really exist. And I think it's almost now the shift has happened where that is now dominant in the movement, is like it's the outreach to become vegan, which I'm not saying this is a bad thing or anything like that, not at all, but I think it's almost, there's been a massive shift away from vivisection, and I don't know if it's also partly because of the campaigns that happened and in the past and everything that happened with say ALF and the likes of Mel and all the people who really were in these campaigns, but then obviously ended up going to prison and things like this. And the Shack campaign and all this, and I don't know if also the industry has also made it much more challenging as well to get in to get exposure, even to get footage in the laboratories, and I just think it just seems like it's been a real shift, and maybe now it feels that that's really much more difficult now as well. It's more difficult to get footage and get into laboratories. It's much more difficult to speak to people about vivisection than it is about veganism. It's much more, it just seems less available almost to new activists. I feel that's the way it feels to me. I don't really understand how we can shift it apart from just putting more focus into campaigns, which I know is happening. I know Mel is back on with a lot of campaigns with Speak, and I know there's an element of this being introduced into London now with campaigns outside different universities and things in London. So I know that there's a little bit more happening with it, but it just I really think about this a lot and think, well, how can we do more effective campaigning now in terms of anti-vivisection? What can we do more? Who can we speak to? Who can we talk to? How do we raise the awareness to the public about this? It seems like it's a very difficult area to talk to people about as well. A different energy to veganism, I think.
Yeah. Do you think that the advent of a vaccine for the COVID-19 virus will cause a division in the vegan movement?
I can see that already, actually. I can see there are people who are very much pro-vaccine and really kind of on board with what COVID is all about, and we have to look after ourselves, and if we're going to save our lives and all this, we have to go along with that. And then other people are not even believing that COVID is even real. There's almost so much going on. I can see in different ways people having these different opinions, and then also the theory of like, we're not going to have the vaccine, even regardless of vivisection, in that what are they trying to pump into us? What are they giving us in this vaccine? But definitely in terms of the experimentation that's been done on other animals with the vaccine, I think a lot of people, I think the core of people feel very strongly against that, to be fair, from my experience and what I'm hearing people talking about. What do you think about that? What's your view on the vaccine?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, some people ask me if I'm one of these kind of anti-vaxxers, and I said I'm not, but I'm anti-vivisection, and so that obviously colours my attitude towards vaccines. I mean, vaccines are a difficult one from the anti-vivisection thing, in the sense that even all the new batches, as far as I remember, or at least it used to be like this, every new batch would have to be tested. Just again for the toxicities, make sure that it's still kind of okay, because obviously, viruses kind of evolve and change, and I suppose vaccines have got to do that as well. And so there's probably a little bit of kind of tinkering going on all the time in response to what's going on in the changes in the virus itself. So that means that there's a continual cycle of vivisection going on in terms of vaccines, as far as I know. I mean, obviously, all kind of old-time vegans have maybe been okay about using certain aspirins that were developed, 70 years ago or something, and never changed. They were never updated. And so therefore, okay, there was some experimentation, but it was way back then, and it never got repeated. Whereas with vaccines, you've got a more difficult problem, I think. So yeah, I think it's gonna be a tricky one. I mean, the Impossible Burger created a problem. In exactly the same issue. Interesting.
With any medication, you're going to get that. Any treatment, if you go into hospital for any kind of treatment, you're faced with that dilemma, aren't you? Of like, should I accept this medication, knowing that it has been and probably is still being tested on other animals, and it creates a real dissonance. I know for me, it's a very difficult one, and I avoid as much as I possibly can. I really do, and I haven't yet been faced with that. A big health problem that would require, sort of serious.
That's the thing. When it becomes a necessity, that's the issue. And I think most people are very kind of forgiving in that sense then. But in my experience over the years, most vegans tend to be pretty kind of low in terms of their pharmaceutical kind of intake. I mean, I always tend to think that your average kind of Joe soap, you could pick them up and rattle them. The number of times they're just kind of popping pills for this, that, and the other. Almost like the immediate kind of first inkling of anything. Oh, I reach for the bottle. And I don't think vegans do that. And so in that sense, there's a difference in the first place. But it is that kind of life-saving, life-threatening kind of issues that then come very sharply to focus, I suppose.
I have that question: do we actually really need them? And I was speaking to John Owen a couple of weeks ago, and he has had very serious heart condition diagnosed years and years ago, and he was on a lot of medication. But in the last few months, he's taken himself gradually off all his medication, pretty much. I think nothing, if like one thing he's left with. And so it goes to show that sometimes I think, again, it goes back to that conditioning and beliefs. It's like, if we believe we need it, we need it. It's like if you believe you can or you believe you can't, you're right, because whatever you believe will prove to be true. So sometimes I think our beliefs are probably feeding in even to our physical conditions, and then we believe we need the medication or we're going to die. So it's, it's very...
There's some interesting sociology on that too, in the sense that it was found that patients would go to their doctor and they would feel that the doctor has not done their job unless they got a script, that the end product had to be a script. And if the doctor just talked through the issues and maybe gave some lifestyle advice or just some general kind of advice on all kinds of different kind of variables and spectrums, it wasn't good enough. They wanted the script, and without that, they thought the doctor wasn't very good. So there's this kind of pressure always from the patient, as well as the pressure from the pharmaceutical industry, in the sense that doctors have forever been taken to conferences which end up being like golf tournaments, this kind of stuff. And so there's a lot of pressure on doctors, which is why when people switch from one doctor to the other, one doctor might go, oh well, we'll put you on another kind of regime, and essentially they're going on to the kind of pharmaceutical business that sponsors them. And so everything gets changed. So it's a bit of a racket in that sense. I understand. We've got to be a bit skeptical. I think we were probably more skeptical in the past, perhaps cynical, I suppose, in the sense that pharmaceutical industry was. I mean, I always saw it in a pretty bad light. Profit driven. They didn't collaborate. They didn't share data. I mean, even now in COVID, I doubt if the big pharmaceutical businesses are sharing data with each other, which in terms of a global pandemic is exactly what they should do. If human health on a global scale was really that important, they would forget about profits and business secrets and all that kind of stuff, and they would collaborate. But I'm not sure if it's happening, And of course, that just means that there's going to be more animal tests then, because there's going to be duplication going on, rather than it all just being coordinated. Typical pharmaceutical kind of things. I mean, you don't even see. I mean, you'll know names like Hans Royce. The kind of scientific anti-vivisection. They were real big in the 80s, and you don't hear any of those names anymore in terms of, or you don't hear about anything about on video. You don't hear about their books. So anti-vivisection has kind of really dropped off the cliff. So it's interesting. I mean, it'd be interesting to see if it'll make a comeback. Maybe. I mean, it could be something to do with the numbers, I suppose, in the sense that obviously animal use in terms of animal agriculture, massively dwarfs vivisection. I mean, it hardly registers if you did a comparison. But we talk about billions compared with millions.
I have heard activists say that actually, in terms of, well, if we're going to do this on a relative scale, the numbers of animal agriculture far swamp those of the other animals who are in the laboratory, sort of thing. And I think it is just more accessible. I think it's easier as well for activists who are especially new to the movement or new vegans to be, to come into groups that are talking about diet and cruelty. We know we can have a whole conversation about that, cruelty and suffering that's going on. I think that is quite easy, isn't it? It's quite an easy. It's not easy as in, it's not easy to do, but I mean, it's easier to kind of advocate for those kind of things, for a change of diet. It's accessible to the activists, but I think it's also something that the public are more aware of. They're more aware of, like, oh, I've heard of vegan, I've heard of plant-based, I've heard of what's going on. And it's just more, there's something that the person can do immediately about it as well. Like if the person does decide to, okay, I'm going to try reducing my animal product content, intake, or I'm going to try plant-based, I'm going to try becoming vegan, whatever it might be, there's something that they can take action on. Whereas with vivisection, there's some things you can do, like you can stop purchasing certain products and go for products that are cruelty-free and vegan and those kind of things in terms of your toiletries. But when it comes to medication and the scientific and progressive science that's going on, it almost feels like, what do you ask them to do? What call to action is there to ask people to do? I can tell them about it, but then what do they do? And I think there's that as well. I think we feel a bit like, what do we do about it? And so then how do we get other people to do something? And we can say, go and try this product, go and try stopping that from your diet, try to wear these kind of clothes. We can do something very practical.
Yeah, I think it's a fair point. I remember back in the 80s, I went to a doctor in Manchester, and I said, I just want a diagnosis. I don't want any treatment from you. I just want you to tell me what's the score. And he was really upset with me, because that's not the deal. You kind of, I tell you what's wrong with you, and then treat you. And I said, well, I don't want the treatment. I just want the diagnosis, and then I can try and sort it out. But I think a lot of people did that kind of thing. So going back to the podcast.
I was going to ask you, do you think doctors have got the saviour complex? They want to fix you.
Yeah, it's all over the place, really, isn't it? It even comes into social movements, I've heard. So speaking of social movements and the podcast element of it, you obviously got some future guests and future plans. So what are all those? Tell me.
Oh, you want my secrets?
Yeah.
The minute I've got one in edit that I recorded a few weeks ago, and I just have been so well, let's say lack of time, not lack of time because we've all got the same time, but I've just been filling my hours with so much stuff that I haven't made the time to edit yet. But that one's coming out this week. That's going to be Ronnie Lee. He's going to be on there. And then I really want to get more women on the show. As you know, I've spoken to you about this before. I want to get more women on the show. So I've reached out to a few different women, and I'm not sure if I'm going to tell you actually, because I think some of them are still in the kind of. And if one of them's Ingrid, just don't tell me. That'd be interesting. I might get you and Ingrid on together. That would be interesting.
Yeah, that'd be an interesting one. Yeah, that would be an interesting one. I'd like to ask her a few questions actually, but there you go.
So yeah, I've got a woman in mind who definitely wants to do it. She's just got a few other things to do before that. She'll be an interesting one, and I've got in mind a few people. I want to speak to a few people who are running sanctuaries as well. Just about how the sanctuaries run, the kind of politics that are going on in sanctuaries, how it actually is when we're trying to care for the other animals that are actually we've taken out of those situations that we want them out of. I mean, obviously we say they're not fully liberated, but they're as liberated as we can get them.
Really, but it's interesting that actually one thing that I've done recently, the last couple of weeks, but it's not published now because it's going to be part of VegFest Summerfest, is I spoke to Harold Brown and Declan Bowens together because they were both farmers who became vegans, and they had like a fascinating take, and I wanted to try and create a conversation between two people in that situation. So Declan was from Ireland and Harold from North America. It was really fascinating because they kind of knew the ins and outs of the industry that they now oppose.
Yeah.
In a unique way. Nobody can kind of come up to them and go, "Oh, you don't know what you're talking about," and they go, "Well, actually,
Yeah. I look forward to that one.
Yeah, I can burst. That happened on the street of Dublin quite often. You lot, you've never been on a farm, and you go, excuse me, the Declan, and all that, and that burst that bubble straight away. It's very useful to have an ex-farmer on your vegan stall. You know what I mean?
Yeah, definitely. That's great. Yeah, I really look forward to that conversation because that'll be
yeah, it was good. It came out well, and I really enjoyed the interaction because they started asking each other questions and stuff, and it's really good. And they were talking about the difference between subsidies in different countries and all that. But I won't spill any more of those beans because that's going to come up in August. So I want to thank you for being my guest, and I look forward to seeing you again, which is probably going to be in a couple of hours because we've got a planning meeting for the show coming up.
We do.
Yeah. So we've got a show on the 1st of August. So I'll probably get this out before that. So we might as well advertise it. So the Animal Rights Show, next show is on the 1st of August, and it's called Beyond Welfarism, and it's talking about trying to introduce rights-based language into whatever activism that people are into, I suppose. So in terms of showing computer footage on the streets or just stalls or whatever, and so that's going to be an interesting one.
That is going to be interesting.
Yeah, feeds into all our kind of Tom Reagan stuff and all that. So,
so anyway, the rights way, I think we've got two titles, haven't we? We've got the Communicating the Rights Way, and then Beyond Welfarism. And I can't remember the end of that one. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So we smashed them together and just. I think it's got kind of like a title in the meme or the kind of thing, and it's got a longer one as part of the description, I think. So 1st of August, folks. So thanks again, Wendy, for being my guest, and I wish you well and good luck with your podcast. And I do these so infrequently. You're bound to catch up with me, so you'll be overtaking me within a couple of months. So
Oh, thanks for having me on, Roger. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thanks for asking me.
You're welcome. You take care.
You too. See you soon.
Yeah. Bye, Earthlings.
Bye, everyone.